Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar. We'll get started here in just a few minutes, letting the audience kind of trickle in here, and then we'll get going. Thank you so much for joining.
Speed is everything. But do you know what's better than speed? Smart speed. Using information to push performance. Using data to score more, win more, and even sell more. That's what we do. We help you sell smarter, faster, and more. We use data to predict and prescribe who to call, when to call, and even which deals will close. Do you know who you should contact if it's raining in the Northeast and sunny in the Midwest? Or which opportunity you should focus on during the baseball playoffs? What about which of your leads is ready to buy right now? We know, and we can tell you what to do, all at the click of a button. We do the heavy thinking so you can do the selling. It's not just speed, it's smart speed. It's sales acceleration built on the world's first predictive cloud for sales. So you can sell smarter, sell faster, sell more, and sell anywhere.
Hello again, everyone. This is John Seeds from WebFortis, and we appreciate you joining today. We're going to go ahead and kick off here. As people come in, they can jump on, but we want to keep everybody on their schedule for the day. So going through the agenda, obviously we'll do a quick introduction to myself, WebFortis, and the speakers for the webinar here, as well as jumping right into the meat of the content from there. With Steve Martin talking about really how to navigate B2B sales and reaching those decision makers, and then into a technology application of some of the things that Steve has talked about today with Ivan Hurt from Inside Sales. And then finally we'll wrap up with a Q&A where you'll have a chance to ask some questions directly to any of the presenters today. So without further ado, we'll get started here. As I mentioned, there's a couple of speakers on today's call. My name is John Seeds. I'm the Senior Marketing Director with WebFortis, and I'll give a brief introduction after this of who we are and kind of why we're putting on the webinar today. But Steve Martin is kind of our featured act here today with noted sales books and different teachings and consultations under his belt. He's going to give some great insight into some specific tactics and some overall strategies of B2B sales. And then, as I mentioned, Ivan Hurt, who's their product marketing manager at Inside Sales, is going to give a little bit of insight into how the technologies that Inside Sales brings to the market can be adapted to some of the things that Steve is talking about. So WebFortis is the organization sponsoring today's webinar. We are a Microsoft Dynamics CRM partner, really focused on services, solutions, and consulting, getting businesses up and going with new implementations, helping look at old systems for either updates or aligning business processes, and really with a focus on innovation that fits your organization. And the way we do that is by not just focusing on the technology itself, but also the people and processes that go along with that. And an example of that here today is really thinking about some of those things in addition to the technology to make sure that you're really fitting the business processes to what you're doing from a technology standpoint. And so just a little bit about us. We've got 4 top-selling CRM books that were authored by our CEO, who's a Microsoft MVP, over 500 customers that we support globally and growing, and then 100% certified consultants across the U.S. helping our customers day to day, and again, focused on Microsoft Dynamics CRM. And so I'm not going to bore you anymore with about us. I want to get really focused on what Steve has to bring to the table. And so I'll introduce him now, and he can give you a little bit of background about himself and then get into some of the best practices for today. So, Steve, it's all yours.
Oh, thanks, John. And hello, everyone. I'm so glad you could join us today. We have, I got to forewarn you, first of all, this will be a very unusual webinar because I'm going to cover the topic today probably in a way that you don't expect it. So I should take a minute and explain what you're looking at. You're looking at the cover of my latest book, and you'll notice the title is Heavy Hitter IT Sales Strategy. And I write the Heavy Hitter series of books for senior salespeople, and the books are predicated on modeling successful behavior, and that's successful behavior of top salespeople and top sales leaders. So that's kind of what the books are about. But the important thing is actually the subtitle of this book, and it says Competitive Insights from Interviews with 1,000 plus Key Information Technology Decision Makers and Top Technology Salespeople. Now, that's the important part. Today, I've had the chance to interview thousands of evaluators and decision makers while they're making their selection between vendors and between salespeople. And I've also had the opportunity to interview thousands of salespeople across all industries. These are the best salespeople that work for some of the world's greatest companies to figure out what they do and how they do it. So here we are. We're nearing the end of a quarter, and I wanted to provide you with some practical tactics to help you end your quarter strong. And then I wanted to provide you with something else, and that is the strategies to set yourself up for the next quarter and the next year beyond that. And so that's what we're going to do today. I hope you enjoy it. I'll try to be a little bit of funny, but I'm not the actor comedian Steve Martin, but I hope we enjoy ourselves today. A little bit more about my background. I mentioned the Heavy Hitter series of books, but they're different. They're on the human nature of complex sales. And what that means is my area of expertise is really something called sales linguistics. And I'm going to teach you a little bit about sales linguistics today so that you understand what it is. And basically, sales linguistics is a study of how customers, prospective decision makers, and salespeople use language in the evaluation process. So, and I also do a lot of studying on the dynamics of politics and group organizational decision-making and write about that in my books. And then I write about something that's you probably don't think about an awful lot, but you use every day, and that's sales intuition. And so I'm going to talk about these topics a little bit today as well to introduce them to you. Now, one of the things that I have the privilege of doing for my accounts, my clients, is win-loss studies. And so they bring me in to figure out, on this heartbreaking loss, this account that they invested so much time, energy, emotion, resources, manpower, effort, why did they lose? And when did they lose? And so they can have the corrective actions so that doesn't happen again. On the other side, they also want to know why they won. What were the key criteria? How did they win so that they can model that behavior? And so that's what I'm going to roll in today. And then I also obviously do training workshops, and I do a lot of keynote presentations where I share some of my research. And my research is very unique. The research I do is on high-performing sales organizations and top salespeople. That's what I study. That's what I enjoy. That's what I love doing for a living. And so I publish a lot of that research. So I want to invite you, first of all, jump on my website at stevewmartin.com if you want to take a look at some of the research articles. You'll also find about 30 of my Harvard Business Review sales articles, which are pretty good reading, and you'll find links to them right on the website. And you'll notice that my color scheme on my slides is cardinal and gold, and that's not by accident. That's because I actually teach at the University of Southern California Marshall MBA program, and so I use the Trojan colors. So if there's any Trojans out there, fight on. One last thing I want to say before we get into the program is connect with me on LinkedIn. I've got some great research coming out in 2016, and I'd love to share it with you. And so the first place I notify people of its availability is on LinkedIn. All right. Now, you're looking at a slide right now, and there's a couple ways you can interpret this. You could say, hey, that's just a slide of a bunch of logos. And this happened to be my client mix. I work predominantly with technology companies because that's my background in Silicon Valley. But it's more than that. Each sales organization is completely and totally unique. It may be in the same industry as another company, but they occupy different spaces in the competitive landscape. And in fact, there's a life cycle of sales organizations, and this impacts your competitiveness as a salesperson. There's a build stage where a sales organization is just getting started and they're trying to refine their sales model, and then they go into a compete stage. And the compete stage is where typically they're trying to compete against bigger companies that are well established. And then there's a maintain stage where that company is now at a point where they're just trying to grab market share from another competitor, and the market's very well defined. And then finally, there's an extend stage where you try to extend and develop deeper relationships with your clients. And then there's a decline stage. So when you think about your organization and you think about your position, you first of all also need to recognize its position in context of your competition and what stage you're in. And this is particularly true if you're a sales leader, because the sales leader at each of the hundreds of organizations that I work with fundamentally influences the ability of their organization to win more business. And so that's why we need to study where we win and why we lose. And how we're going to do this today is a little bit different, like I mentioned. I'm going to cover 4 major topics. I'm going to talk about how decision makers evaluate vendors and select the winners. I'm going to talk about why B2B salespeople lose. That sounds pretty depressing, quite frankly, but it's interesting and you need to know. And then I'm going to talk about key moments where you win and lose. And I want to finish up with just 3 competitive advantages top salespeople enjoy. But I'm going to do this in a different way, as I mentioned, and this is the way I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it by sharing with you excerpts from interviews from my win-loss study. And I'm going to read you the first one. I can tell you what makes a bad rep. They don't come prepared when they see me. They don't understand my business. They don't research what we have in place or understand what challenges we might be facing. They want us to do the legwork and educate them about everything, and I don't have the time. If you don't know what you're asking me for and why you're asking about it, forget it. Great reps have done their homework. So when they're in my office, they can talk to me knowledgeably. They cut the bull. They don't tell me things they can do. They don't tell me they can do things they can't. They're honest. Now that was from an IT manager. So what's your takeaway from that quote? What do you walk away with? And so I'll help you. Here's my first takeaway. The first thing is sales is a language-based business. That's the first thing. And there's key words in this quote: prepared, research, asking, homework, knowledgeably, bold, and honest. Those are key words. But more importantly, today's customer is different. They're smarter than ever. They're more sophisticated. They have more choices than ever. They have more information than ever. They're better prepared to make a decision, and they're evaluating you differently than they have in the past. And your competitors haven't sat idly by. They're also arming themselves with ways to defeat you. So with that, I want to talk about this. Not a happy topic. Why the top reasons B2B salespeople lose. Now, the first reason is the incumbent advantage. And here's a quote from a vice president of purchasing. It's a pain to switch vendors. It's a pain to analyze whether you should or not. We naturally prefer working with our existing vendors. You know, there's different types of sales cycles. There are sales cycles where you're competing against your arch rival in a head-to-head bake-off evaluation. There are sales cycles where you are trying to take an existing client and expand their use of their product. And there's sales cycles where you're trying to displace an incumbent. So I've got to ask you a question. What do you think your odds of displacing that incumbent are in an account? Well, what do you think? Well, based upon my research, it's less than 1 in 5. It's 1 out of 5, which means it's actually about 85% of the time you're trying to replace an incumbent, you're going to lose. It isn't going to happen. It's because people don't want to switch. The devil you know, so to speak, is better than the devil you don't know. And that's a direct quote I heard from a purchasing manager one day. The second reason is this: the inability to remove risk. Risk mitigation is huge. It's all about risk mitigation, particularly as you reach the upper levels of the organization in the decision-making process. And so when you think about this quote, it sorts itself out pretty fast. Those who will make it with us and those who won't. So a key aspect of your sales effort is to prove that you are the least riskiest decision. And where there is risk, you have to mitigate that risk and quantify it for the customer. How about this one? business solution focus. Winners are better able to prove their value as a business partner. They're solving the customer's problem. I have the ability, and this is what's really fun about what I get to do. Companies hire me to tag along with their sales team to figure out how they're talking to customers and to figure out how their customers speak. I get to witness a lot of interactions. And it's natural that when you're in that high-pressure meeting, you fall back on that product pitch. I get it. I understand it. But we have to be disciplined in our approach with language, and we have to understand that we're not there to sell a product. We're there to solve a problem. Ineffective messaging, another language-based reason. Do you tailor your message for the audience, or do you just have the same pitch that you recite over and over again? And this gets back to that comment about the research and the preparation. And so how do you prove your strategic value? And your strategic value is how you save someone money, how you make their operations more efficient, how you standardize their operations, how you decrease costs and mitigate risk. And then there's the operational value. How do you improve the daily operations of their department? And how do you prove that to them? What are your proof points? Are they customer stories? How do you relate it back to the solution you solve so that they feel that their risk is mitigated by moving forward with you? Now we're going to talk about this next one in a little more detail, and that's the bias sales cycle. Oh, I have some depressing news for you in a minute. A high percentage of the sales cycles you're working on, the decision was already made before the sales cycle started, and we have to be aware of that. So we have to have formal and informal qualification to ferret that out ahead of time. A couple more reasons. Let's go on to the next one. Did you know you're a general? You're actually a general who has to marshal the resources of your organization and apply it on that battlefield against that arch rival. And how you're going to do that is through other folks, the teammates that you work with. And so when I work with these customers, say, so why did you make your decision? A key part of that decision is that the client felt that the pre-sales resources one vendor brought on board to demonstrate the products, to lay out the architecture, to ascertain the needs and validate that the solution would work was much better than the other. And so here you have a quote. The vendor we chose has a group of smart, dedicated, customer-oriented people to agree that their products and services are no different. And that's the other part of this. Today, product differentiation is at an all-time low. Lack of an internal champion, an internal coach, huge in B2B sales. Absolutely absolutely huge, is that if you do not have a coach, if you do not have someone on the inside providing you privileged, proprietary information about what's happening on the internal machinations of the sales cycle at the customer side, be prepared to lose. So a great exercise right after this call is go through your quarterly pipeline right now and go through, and for each account you expect to close, rate your coach, rate their strength. Are they helping you? Are they providing you that privileged proprietary information? Out-of-range pricing. Now, I hear this a lot. We lost because of price. Well, my research has basically proved that the following. And if you took it generalized for all different types of industry, all different types of sales cycle, now it does vary by specific application industry. About 38% of the sales cycles I've studied, there was a price-conscious buyer, which means they were more fixated on price, and that was a primary criteria. About 42%, they were price-sensitive, which means price played a role, but it was by far not the most important role. And about 20% were absolutely price-immune, which means they'd spend whatever they want to get the solution they want. So price, it's always a topic of conversation in the sales cycle, but it isn't necessarily the most important topic. And then finally, another top reason salespeople lose is just the access to the C-level. And there is a direct correlation between the number of interactions that you have with the client at the senior level and your ability to win. So let's think about this in another way. Let's think about the sales cycle in stages, okay? And I'm going to simplify this. And there's 4 basic stages. There's a customer research stage. That's where the customer is off doing their independent research, whether it be online, whether it be through word of mouth, whether it be through rumors in the industry. They're figuring out what they want to do. They're talking to others at trade show. They're getting knowledgeable about what they're trying to do, the business opportunity, their problem they're trying to solve. And then there's a product stage, and that's where these sales teams of the competing vendors are introduced. And so now they're doing a head-to-head. Now they're trying to figure out who's better and why. And then as the sales cycle progresses, it gets into a business stage, and that's the assessment of the business value that vendor brings and the philosophical fit of that vendor to that client. And where there's a mismatch, there's typically not a win. And then finally, there's a political stage, and that's the final decision-making process. And so when you think about this, I know I laid it out in very clear lines, but it can be very shades of gray and overlap. For example, in a marketplace, if there's a dominant competitor and that competitor has a dominant market share, the final stage, the political stage, may be pushed way forward because that player is such a big player. But here's my main point. There's a relative influence on the selection process, and it's this. At the bottom, you'll see the influence of customer research. You'll see it go down as the sales cycle progresses, and then it ticks back up towards the end. And at the top, you'll see there's an influence of the organizational politics and the group decision-making dynamics. That's that evaluation team. And everyone on that evaluation team has different ulterior motives, different priorities, and a different propensity for risk. And that gains in importance as the decision process goes on. And then in the middle, you'll see something that stays relatively the same. And that's the attributes of what you're actually selling. And what you're actually selling is three things. You're selling the product you sell, the service, the solution. You're selling the company you work for, and you're selling you. Okay? So those are the three things. And you'll see that staying relatively influenced. So politics and the dynamics of it is the final decision maker. And I can tell you this. I have talked to CEOs and CIOs and CFOs. The politics is the final decision maker, and it's based upon the human nature. Now, there are key sales moments in a sales cycle. And let's think about a traditional RFP-based sales cycle, and I've laid it out for you right here. And if you look at it, you can see the customer determines their requirements, then they research vendors, and they pick 4 to 7, then they send them an RFP, and then they might allow the vendors to come in and do an interview. And then they evaluate the RFP processes, and they narrow down the vendors, and then they might do presentations, and then there's clarifications, and they select 2 finalists, and there might be site visits, product testing. You're very familiar with this, I'm sure. And this is just one of the sales cycles. Well, in this sales cycle, there's 4 critical moments, and here they are. The first is up front, and it's because, just from the previous slide, the vendor who is up front in that customer evaluation phase where they're doing independent evaluation, the salesperson who is helping them do that before they engage the other teams obviously has an advantage. You have a chance to set the criteria. You have a chance to really understand the dynamics of the organization and influence it. The second is the presentation. Why? Because at that presentation, over a period of just a few days, a week or so, all the vendors are going to march in and give their customer presentation and explain why they're the best. And that's a chance when all the decision-making stack is going to be there. It's at that moment where a huge percentage of sales cycles, the vendor ahead goes to behind and the underdog goes ahead. And then you have the other moment number 3. And that's where they allow the interviews. The interviews are a chance for you and your pre-sales resources to demonstrate their expertise just by asking questions and doing research. And then finally, you have site visits and product testing. When the customer gets their hands on the product or when they see it in action, that's a very persuasive moment in the sales cycle. You know, I mentioned when the decision is actually made. And so here's the bad news. Now, this is a generalization across all industries, that about 30% of the time in that RFP head-to-head type sales cycle, the decision is flat-out wired for someone ahead of it. Just flat-out wired. Someone's in the lead, and they're going to retain the lead through this entire sales process and sales cycle. And for lack of a better word, that RFP was just a red herring. It wasn't real. About 45% of the time, halfway through the sales cycle, halfway through the RFP-based selection process, the decision's been made. So here's what you have. 75% of the time, halfway through that selection process, the decision's been made. So if you're not winning, you're losing, and the likelihood of winning is small. Only about 20 to 25% of the times in my research is as the RFP an honest evaluation where they're really trying to find the best possible solution. And there's some quotes to the right from some of my clients, from some of my client win-loss interviews that you can read. Our favorite came through. Yes, we had a favorite in and they won. It quickly became apparent it would be a two-horse race, and this is very common. It's not. People think it's a close decision. It usually isn't a close decision. But this can vary. For example, if you were in the application software industry segment, it's about 55%. I mean, it's much higher. And I've been in different vertical segments where it's upwards of 70 and 75% of the RFPs, of those RFIs that are issued, of the selection process that are engaged, are completely wired for a vendor. So we have to obviously be on our guard. And the other thing about that is this. What is your definition of sales strategy? Think about this for a moment. What is your definition of sales strategy? I want you to think about a one or two sentence definition. Well, here's my definition. You might want to think about it. Strategy is the overriding plan to win the business by establishing and maintaining account control. And the goal of strategy is to neutralize the competitor's advantage, place them in a position of an indefensible position, and most importantly, today's number one enemy is no decision. So we have to anticipate no decision and motivate the customer to buy. And then we have our tactics, and our tactics are their interactions with the client, and then the maneuvers that get us to the next interaction. So I said account control. What is account control? Well, account control is based upon these 7 requirements. And these 7 requirements are, I'm going to lay them out for you. They're pretty exhaustive, and I want, as you're reading them, as you're thinking about them, apply them to some of the accounts that you want to close this quarter. So the first one is this: intimate knowledge of the selection process, and equally important, or even more important in some cases, the negotiation process for the contract, and then the procurement process that's associated with that negotiation process. A lot of business is lost to no decision, and it's happening in that procurement process and that negotiation process. The second thing is the ability to influence the selection process. And what I mean by that is I mentioned those stages, right? We have the different stages, the product stage, the business stage, the political stage. We need to direct those stages and influence them by what? By using our mouth. The third thing is trusted relationships and rapport. Trusted relationships and rapport. Rapport in sales linguistics is defined as harmonious communication. Do we have harmonious communication with all of the evaluators up and down the chain of command and across the various departments? The fourth element of account control is the ability to persuade the people involved in the selection process to follow your advice and recommendations, and equally important, disseminate information throughout the organization to people on your behalf. 5, do we know the story behind the story? Do we have a coach that's telling us what's really happening in the sales cycle? And 6, do we have accurate information about where we're at? Do we know whether we're winning or losing? And that's a terrible place to be when we're unsure, because we can't execute a strategy to counteract it. And 7, do we have access to the leaders and the executives who must approve and pay for the purchase? This is the panacea of definition of account control. And you know what, quite frankly, it's not easily achieved, and it's not achieved in every account. So we operate in a perfect world, and we may have 4 of these or 5 of these, but we have to make an assessment based upon our sales intuition what we do next. So when you think about it, the sales cycle is really about this. We have to gain momentum, and we have to do it almost an interaction at a time, okay? And so, you know, when you think about what is momentum, momentum is continued a customer's commitment to continuing evaluating you. In sales, the term absence makes the heart grow fonder is not true. We cannot be absent. We have to have demonstrated proof that we're gaining momentum, and that could be more meetings with the evaluation team. They're introducing us to the senior decision makers. It could be now we're getting over into the legal team, the procurement people. We want that commitment based upon the time they're spending, based upon the effort and energy they're putting in to evaluate us. And that's what this is about. But there's a problem, and the problem is this. You know, in every sales cycle, and this is the fascinating part when I conduct this research and I talk to someone who evaluated 3 different vendors, and they could have been evaluating those vendors for 10 months or a year or year and a half, and that sales cycle was moving along. All three vendors thought they were going to win, but it doesn't work that way. There's turning points, and these turning points are where you lose momentum. And what happens is you probably don't recognize it because the other vendors didn't. Everyone thinks they're winning. What we want to do is we want to make sure that we are operating on honest, unfiltered truth. Because there's only 2 acceptable places to be in the sales cycle. One is in first, the winner. And second is the very first loser. Every place in between is an air where we're investing time and energy, momentum where we can't win. All right, so I wanted to end my little session with you today talking about 3 things, 3 advantages of top salespeople, and then I'll turn it over to Ivan. I want to talk about your selling style for a moment. You know, I've researched, thousands of salespeople, and I found that they have very unique personality traits, and they tend to be achievement-oriented, and they have a strong sense of duty, and what that means is that they have a conscious duty to their clients and customers, and their word is their word. They tend to be modest. You know, at sales meetings, I'll have a panel, and I'll always have the top salespeople on it. And the first thing these top salespeople do is acknowledge the people who help them become successful. They're modest. And they have a low self-consciousness and a low discouragement, and they tend to be curious people. I know when I'm talking to a top salesperson because that person is asking me more questions about me than I'm asking about them. And what this personality orientation translates into is a selling style. And that selling style is a person who's politically oriented. They think people and politics, not just products and features and functions. I'm going to talk to you a little in the next slide about situational dominance. It's a principle of sales linguistics. They have it. They're focused thinkers and practical planners. They don't overplan, and they don't underplan. They do just the right amount of planning to accomplish their mission, and their mission is to grow their territory or penetrate that account or grow their presence and their footprint in an existing client. They're action-oriented. They're unafraid to close. And they're unafraid to ask tough questions because they're always searching for the ultimate in sales, and that is the truth. Will I win this business and win? So what is your selling style? Have you actually thought about it? Have you actually measured it and said, here's my selling style and here's my selling philosophy? Because I would suggest you write this down. When you can write down your sales philosophy, you have one. And it'll make you a better person, a better salesperson. Now, the second aspect of top salespeople is this, situational dominance. And when you think about situational dominance, it's this concept. You know, every interaction with the potential prospective customer, we can be in one of 3 positions. We can be submissive, where that customer thinks of us only as a salesperson. We can be equal, where they think of us as a peer. Or we can be dominant. Now, dominant is not a negative term. Dominance just means that when that person respects you so much that they'll follow your advice, opinions, and recommendations. And so my question to you is, do you have situational dominance? Do you know you can do testing to figure out if you have it? For example, you know, if I asked you a question and said, let's pretend you're having a hallway conversation with 3 colleagues, and I'm going to give you 3 different answers to select from. Do you remain silent the majority of time, letting others speak? That's A. Do you speak an equal share of the conversation? That's B. Or do you usually find yourself talking the majority of time? That's C. Well, these types of questions you can use to measure your situational dominance. For example, A has a lower natural situational dominance than C. So if you selected C, you have a higher level of natural situational dominance. And I've done some studies, and I found about 28% of field sales folks, B2B sales folks, have a high situational dominance. About 47% have an average. About 18% are slightly below average, and about 7% are low. So knowing your situational dominance is very important, because in sales linguistics, this principle is we have to make sure that we're adjusting it for that client and controlling that conversation naturally. So we need a strategy to deal with it when we have a naturally low situational dominance. Now, I'm going to talk about your sales intuition to end my session. And you might not think about it a lot, but it's a fascinating thing. Your sales intuition is absolutely remarkable. It's a powerful heuristic engine, and it's always learning from the past. And there's really there's 4 components to your sales intuition. The first step is recognizing and sensing the moment. When you're with that client, are you recognizing all aspects of the data, of the information that's being presented to you? And that's communication and language. And language is verbal, nonverbal. It's conscious, subconscious. There's so much more to language than most people think. So are you recognizing the language? And then, are you recognizing the experience? And then you have to decode the meaning. And to decode the meaning, this is the important part. You're decoding the meaning and trying to categorize it in terms of your wins and losses. Let's say you're an inside salesperson. Where do you win? What are the unique aspects of language that prospective client says that you say somewhere in the back of your mind, I can win this business? Or you say to yourself, there's no chance here, let's move on. That's the important part of sales intuition, is decoding the meaning. Now, most great salespeople do this naturally, but what do you think? How does your sales intuition work? You know, how do you interact with the selection committee members, and how do you define your competitive position, and how do you track the losses you've had and the wins, and how do you model them going forward? That's what your sales intuition is doing for you. And I find the top salespeople have a finer granularity and a more developed sales intuition. And then you have to store the experience back in your mind. So you have to be attentive. And you have to be able to analyze that sales cycle and say, here's what happened. And you have to be honest and objective about it and take this and then correlate it back to whether you win or lost, and at what moment did you win or lose it, and what did you do when you won or lost? What did you say or what did you not say to that decision maker? And then finally, you got to use it in the future. You have to know how to invoke it. And you have to understand how your mind works and how it records experiences and then how it pulls them back. And so you think of top salespeople are usually very quick-witted and fast on their feet. That's their sales intuition. It's finely tuned. And this is a fascinating subject to me. And I love studying people's sales intuition. And here's another piece of advice for you today. In your office, assuming you're in an office today, talk to some of your fellow salespeople about their sales intuition. Get to understand how they win and why they lose. Figure out what model they use and what behaviors they use to win. Because if you want to become a heavy hitter, modeling successful salespeople is the fastest way to get there. All right. Now, I covered a ton of stuff today in a very short period of time, and I want to thank you for your fabulous attention. I also want to let you know tons of articles and research on stevewmartin.com, some great new stuff coming out in 2016. Connect with me on LinkedIn, and I'll let you be notified about it. And with that, I'll turn it right over to Ivan. Why don't you take it away, Ivan?
All right, Steve, great content as always. I really appreciate that. You know, Steve talked about how do you get ahead of the sales curve and how do you model successful behavior. I'm going to take about 5 or 6 minutes to kind of walk through some examples and then turn it over to Q&A so we can get some of the feedback. A lot of people putting stuff up right now. Inside sales sits firmly between the marketing automation layer and the CRM layer. And what we try to do is help organizations accelerate the time to close deals to reduce that sales cycle down. Ultimately, we feel like science holds the key to unlocking human potential. And in this case, we apply it directly to salespeople. Just like Steve said, what are those habits that top salespeople do, and how do we mimic those? How do we make systems that implement those to help us all perform better? So as you all know, we're going through a computing and an information evolution. We've seen lots of systems come and go right now and a lot of big data, but really what we need is predictive science, and that's where we're at. But a lot of organizations don't have the resources or, be they people, be they finances or whatever, to really do that predictive science on their own. And this is really where some tools come in to help the sales force do that. Let me give you a real quick example about what I mean about predictive science. Lots of stats out there in sports. Something like batting average gives you a lot of information about the person, but it's really just one piece of information. You add in some of the other variables, the types of pitchers, the location, left-handed, right-handed, who that person goes after. There's a lot of statistical modeling that happens there, and that helps as well. But where you really gain the value and where you win is when you bring those models and that raw data into machine learning. And as we all know, they've made a major motion picture about this. And that was really about the power of data and prescriptive analytics and how they can help organizations move forward. Now let's look at that from a sales role. Predictive, first off, gives you visibility. Those gray bars represent the leads you have. If you were able to see your best leads and your worst leads, obviously your best leads close exponentially better than your medium and lower leads. But you're not able to do that. With predictive, it gives you visibility so you can see where you're spending time and how you're wasting it on some of the least likely leads to close. It also gives you productivity increases, allows you to move that wasted energy from those poor resources, from those deals that either you're way too late in the funnel to get involved in or you're missing key functionality or some other reason, helps you move that productivity and capacity onto the deals that are most likely to be successful for you. And then ultimately, it aligns your effort. My apology there. It ultimately aligns your effort so that the resources you do have, be it 1 or 1,000 sales reps, are focused on the top quality leads that are going to drive your organization forward the fastest. Okay. So here's another example of how predictive helps. This is actually a chart that a customer provided back from us with our forecasting tool. On day one of their quarter, they're averaging about 83% accuracy of where they end at the end of the quarter. This is the type of data that allows organizations and individual sales reps to move forward. You can drill down into that and see individual deals and what's likely to help close and what you should focus on. So we've talked about Microsoft. There's other CRMs out there. In this case, we'll work through a scenario where you have Microsoft. You see scoring that shows you which are the best leads to focus on. Email and web tracking that brings information back to you so you have higher visibility in what's going on in those deals. Are they opening up you've sent over a proposal. Have they opened that up? Have they forwarded that? Has another individual in your organization opened it? Have they gone back to your pricing page? Things like that. Understanding when you're done with that record, what is the next best opportunity in your pipeline for you to go work on? Working, this is one of the small things that Steve talked about, was just connecting with people. People like to work with people that are in their local area code, just something as simple as providing an area code that allows them to see you as a local peer. And then isn't this bottom one, and I know that the text there is pretty small, but this is about 100 billion sales interactions right here, simplified into 3 pieces of information. Can I win this deal? Am I likely to win this deal this quarter? And then what are some of the top reasons I can win this deal, and what are some of the top reasons I need to watch out for? So because you've been ingesting this data into your CRM, it's able to go in. This is what I was talking about, that raw data input, some of the statistical modeling, and then the machine learning. And this is how simple it can be and fed back to a salesperson to let them know what are those deals they need to focus on and win. Ultimately, we see an average of about 15 to as much as 32% increase in close rates as people start to leverage prescriptive analytics and actions into their sales process. And with that, A couple of things I want to make sure you know. The webinar is being recorded and it will be shared with you. Please share it out to your colleagues or anyone you want. And then also we've provided a couple of resources, a couple of product flyers, an ebook around data-driven hiring and other resources, and then, of course, a link to ask for a demo. John, with that, I'll turn it back over to you to have a little bit of live Q&A.
Great, great. Thanks, Ivan, and Steve, thank you, too, for the great insight that you shared today. We have a couple questions here. If you do have any questions now, feel free to type it into the Q&A box, and we'll read it out loud here for the folks to answer. The first one actually comes to Steve. Where does the inside sales rep kind of stand in the sales cycle?
Where does, hey, John, repeat that question one more time. Was it where does the inside sales rep stand in the sales cycle?
Correct.
You know, this is, first of all, inside sales has completely changed over the last few years, and the dynamic has changed. In fact, I did some significant research recently where I evaluated interviewed several hundred VPs of sales, and what I found is that there's a huge shift. About 46% of them were shifting from more of a field-based sales model to an inside sales-based model. So there's first of all, the whole perception of inside sales is changing. And I'm witnessing it firsthand, because years ago, inside sales was essentially thought of as the training ground, the AAA baseball team that groomed people for the field, and that's just not the truth anymore, because there's been major changes in buyer habits and demographics. So what we have today is we have people who are more comfortable buying online. And so when I say inside sales, that to me just means it's there's the connection between the client and the salesperson is via the internet or over the phone. So, and that's what's happening dramatically across the board. So, my response to that question, where is inside sales, is becoming more important. The pay for it's going up. And in fact, when I think about my client base, some of the most heavily sought after positions right now are in the sales development role, and they're the most challenging to fill. So the whole nature of inside sales is changing, and I think, as Ivan pointed out, you have some different ways to manage and the metrics for it. And so I just think it's frankly, it's the most exciting time to be in inside sales. It's a career in itself. It's not a stepping stone to any other career, and there's a whole new level of management that understands inside sales, that's metrics driven, and that is driving efficiency in the sales organization. So that's kind of my answer to that general question.
Yeah, let me add a little bit to that as well, Steve. Everything you said is spot on, and I also want to point out that, even guys in the field, guys and girls in the field that are selling, they spend the vast majority of the time actually not on site at a customer location. So they are doing remote selling most of the time themselves, trying to get into the appointment, trying to find out what's going on. So many of the tools that are used for an inside seller are actually very actively used by the most productive field sales. And by having them on a consistent framework, consistent CRM, and then framework work on top of that, like any team, when you're pulling all in the same direction, it allows you to achieve more. Simple as that.
Yeah, in fact, Ivan, what you said is right on the money, because you think about the percentage of the sales cycle that is, even for field reps who are selling enterprise deal, the percentage of the sales cycle that's being spent in front of the client is decreasing dramatically, and the online and phone-based interaction is increasing dramatically. So you're right on.
Awesome. Definitely great insight there. Next question comes to us involving foreign markets. Do you have to take into consideration culture when you're selling into foreign markets, for example, B2B sales to Asia?
Well, I'll take that. I'll start with that one. I'll let Ivan add. Well, yeah, I'm going to say something that I think you have to take culture not just in foreign markets, but, for example, if you're in San Francisco selling into Texas, that's a different state. That's a different culture. But I'll even drive it down further. Every company that you are interacting with is a completely different culture, a completely different, one-of-a-kind unique environment. Like you can take, for example, a company like Google. And Google is completely different in their philosophy, in their mantras, in how they evaluate their personnel than, for example, a company like IBM. They're just two completely different cultures, completely different way they're organized and people are evaluated. Now, you go back to the Asia Pacific question, there is an entirely different hierarchical nature to that society. And that influences everything from how people make decisions. I mentioned risk mitigation, how they perceive risk, and then also how they transmit the truth to the salespeople. If I were selling in Brazil, Brazil is in some ways is not that much different than selling in Italy. There's a certain cultural similarity in how they like to get to know the person first, and that's a primary motivator of doing the deal. It's not so in other areas of the world. And so there are definite, cultural nuances. And I mentioned sales linguistics. Sales linguistics is about how the mind translates language. And dialects are just whether I speak French, Spanish, or Japanese. That's just a dialect people speak. But we're all humans, and we all process information in a certain way. Ivan, did you want to add anything on that?
You're spot on, and like you said earlier, knowledge is power, and this is why something like a base CRM of record is really critical. Having that information so that you can go back in, see what's already worked and not worked within those individual accounts. Like you said, even here within Silicon Valley, you can look. Some organizations like to be sold at a technical level, where others like to be sold at a business value level. So the culture clearly is different as we go from country to country, but even within the U.S., within the organizations that you deal with every day, there's a lot of cultural differences, and having predictive insights into what's already happened and then how to move forward is critical to success.
Great. Thanks, guys. Next up is around some of the topics that Steve talked about around changing the sales organization. Do you have any specific recommendations or kind of quick things to think about in order to do that with our business?
So, John, I think your phone acted up. Yeah, so
yeah.
I see the question. I'll just reread it and have you start, Mark, Steve. So a lot of the things you recommended are great ideas, but it's a big change to the organization. What do you do? Where do you start? How do you get there?
It's interesting because, change is in the mind of the beholder. So the things I was talking about today are actually what I would, there's actually, when you think about a sales organization, there's the people, there's the process, and they're tied together to the strategy and the tactics to execute the strategy. So today what I covered was, I would call, higher level, broadcast ideas so that people could start thinking about them. The actual implementation of these ideas vary greatly depending upon the industry you're in, depending upon whether or not the complexity of the products you sell, and then it tailors into the sales cycles that you're involved with. So that's one of the challenges. Like today, I'm talking to, we have, more than 1,000 people who are on this webinar, and everyone on this webinar works in a one-of-a-kind company in a unique situation. And so my thought is, any change that you want to do to an organization, you have to start with the realization of the environment you're in and the goal of where you want to get to go. It's a very personal journey, in other words. So for me to make a recommendation to someone, it's almost impossible for me to do that without knowing the industry, your competitive landscape, your market position, the acumen of the sales force. And so it's difficult for me to, as a doctor, to prescribe a cure when I don't know what the symptoms the patient has. So I don't mean to talk around that question, but what I'm trying to say is every situation has to be methodically planned out to implement change into a sales organization, and it has to be done in a realistic manner to ensure success.
I think Steve is a visionary and has amazing strategy, and that's what he's shown here. And like you say, moving that down, how do you model those successful behaviors? I think this is actually where Web Fortis, our main host, steps up. They have services that allow you to look at what you're doing, how to map that back to the CRM actions that you're using. And then what are the tools like Inside Sales or other tools that can actually make, not enforce is maybe the wrong word, but make easy the way to do the best practices and make hard the way to do the practices that you do not want to happen because they've proven to not be successful. And I think, Steve's spot on that, every company is different, but I think there's definitely, he's at the highest level, and as we come down, we're able to get a little bit more granular at every level.
Yeah, and I just want to make another statement. The technology available for sales organizations is incredible today, and it enables change to happen in a methodical manner where the outcomes are expected like never before. And so that's where I get very excited. These tools didn't exist years ago, and not only the tools, but the emphasis on making the sales organization efficient wasn't there years ago. It was all about the individual salesperson. So now we're seeing a whole change in the dynamic of how sales operations runs effective organizations. So I think the best is yet to come.
All right, John, I think we have time for one more question, and hopefully we're able to hear you a little clearer this time.
Yeah, so I apologize for that today, guys. But one of the final questions here is around specific tactics. How do you recommend leveraging existing clients to get a foot in the door with prospects?
Ivan, did you catch that one? He broke up again.
Yeah, how do you leverage existing clients to help get a foot in the door with future future opportunities and prospects?
I think, Ivan, if you want to talk about that from a system standpoint, that'd be great. Let me just make a quick comment before we get into that. At many of my clients, I use a Net Promoter Score to try to figure out, to try to evaluate whether they have fervent, ardent supporters who would recommend them to others. And in many cases, I'm going to say something that might seem counterintuitive. I think about an anti-Net Promoter Score. And what that means is instead of having, is that in what clients are you at risk? Not the clients who are going to recommend you to, but what clients are you at risk? Because the essence of successful reference selling and having someone be a promoter is the fact that they fervently believe in who you are and what you do. And the likelihood of them actually recommending you to someone is low because the people who are likely to voice their opinions, and you can go on, if you go to any airline counter at any airport, there's not a whole bunch of people at the line complimenting the person behind the counter. They're all delivering their complaints. So that's my point is this. You have to have a strategy to minimize the complainers and bring up the overall customer satisfaction. And when you do that, you are at the point where you're more likely to have that Net Promoter Score, that customer freely giving a successful reference for you. Now, Ivan, is there anything on the system side you'd want to talk about there?
I think you're 100% right, Steve, in that social selling, the negative, one bad negative is going to outweigh 5 or however many positives, and so that is definitely a good place to focus and start with. On the system side, it really keeps coming back to having a complete view, a 360 view of every opportunity that you're looking at, and then knowing which other opportunities are adjacent or similar rather, and that you could leverage. But I definitely do agree with your point that typically the social selling is the negative impact. You always want a customer, of course, to be able to come into another account, same vertical, same geography or whatever in reference, but you are spot on when you say watch the negatives because those are going to hit you even harder. And with that, I think we're out of time. John seems to be having a little bit of communication problems, so I'm going to wrap us up right here. Thank you very much for attending.
I appreciate it, Ivan.
Oh, there you go, actually. You're much clearer now.
Sorry. Yeah, so we appreciate everybody attending. I want to address one last question here around the relationship between Web Fortis and Inside Sales. So Inside Sales is obviously a great software tool that has been developed to help bring to action some of the things that Ivan talked about today, hitting on some of the strategy that Steve mentioned. And Web Fortis, we provide services and consulting to help understand how that can fit into your current CRM ecosystem, really bring together your business processes with the people involved to implement technologies like Inside Sales with Microsoft ecosystems to bring to fruition kind of that goal. So just wanted to touch on that, and again, thank everybody for their time today, and hope that you found some great information. We do have another part in the series coming up at the end of the month, so please be sure to look out for that as well, starring, again, the great Steve Martin. So thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thanks.